man. We're going somewhere. No. This is the doggonest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Hello viewers, SuperGT here. Oh, just kidding. Philip here, and I'll be your tour guide today as we take a look at USA International in the ARCA car. So far, this has turned out to be a pretty good combo if you can make it through the wreck that inevitably happens on the first lap, usually in the first corner. Go ahead and get our first tip out of the way right now, and that's just give a little extra room on these restarts. If you're starting in first gear, your car might get a little bit loose on you when you get to the gas or as you exit the corner on cold tires for your actual race start. So give it a little extra room, be respectful of each other, and you'll probably start making it through these initial race starts just fine. Let's take a second to talk about the basic handling characteristics of these cars. On the initial race start, it's going to be pretty loose, whether you're in first or second gear. Getting down into turn 1 is going to be a bit sketchy because your tires are cold and your brakes are cold, so your braking distance is just a little bit longer, and the car is not quite warmed up, so it's not really set into the track very well just yet. In the early race portion, the car is going to tend to be pretty loose on corner entry and will build tight on corner exit if you're putting down the throttle a little bit too early, or it could also start to build loose if you are putting a little bit more wheel into it on your corner exit, so the car might want to snap around on you just a bit, which can prove to be a real challenge here because if the car does start sliding down towards the inside wall and you try to correct it, the left rear suspension on this setup is so insanely soft that the car just immediately will snap direction and lean on that tire and can cut right up into the outside wall. Saving the car can just be generally difficult on either one of the straightaways because of that. As the race continues and you get some green flag laps under the car, it's really going to communicate to you how you've been driving it. So if you are carrying too much speed down into your corner entry, then you're going to find that it's going to get harder and harder to get the car to change direction as you exit the corner. And two things might happen. Number one, it might not ever change direction and you might ride right up into that outside wall and smack it. Or the other thing that can happen is you'll have so much steering lock into the car that when you try to aggressively put down the throttle to make it out of the turn, the rear end just wants to spin around on you. And the other side of this is if you are being too aggressive on the throttle on your corner exits, then your corner entries might feel okay. They might get a little looser because the rear tires are getting hot. But let's say your front tires are still okay, but as you exit the corner, you're not going to be able to put the power down without just spinning the rest of that rubber off of those back tires and heating them up worse. Which brings us to a pretty interesting point about this track. In the testing that I've done, tire wear over 50 laps hasn't been really that extreme. I'm usually finishing the race with maybe 93% right front tire and 91 right rear. What does really affect the handling of the car is the heat buildup in the tires. So if you're scrubbing them way too much on corner entry, that's what causes the car to get tighter. And if you're spinning them too much coming off of the corner, that's what causes it to get a little bit looser. So it's not so much tire wear as it is heat, which is good because that does mean that you can adjust your driving line, get those tires to cool back off, and get back a lot of that performance. So if you have a couple laps where you're a little bit slower or a little bit wiggly, just cool the tires back off, be gentle and easy with the car, and a good bit of your performance will come back to you. So with the basic stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the qualifying lap and talk about that more in depth, and we'll start the more in-depth part of the video. and we'll come across the line to set a 21.321. That'll put you in a really good spot for most of the races that you'll do this week. So now we'll take a look at the in-depth side of the lap, and it'll all be slow, because there's so much to talk about and not enough time. So as usual for these style tracks, you want to exit high as you come out of turn 4 and really make that front straightaway as long as possible. At this particular track, if you turn down too soon, the car gets loose because you've got so much steering input into the car as you're really heavy on throttle. So you just wait a little bit longer and then turn it down, and you should straighten it out and be okay. Now, one interesting thing these cars do is, because of the way the front geometry of the suspension is, as you apply the brakes and the car starts to nose down into the corner, as everything compresses, it naturally hooks the car off to the left. So you'll see here when we get to the braking zone, I'm not really putting a lot of steering input to get the car to go left. I'm just braking at a point and then knowing the car's going to hook left and kind of work with it from there. So your braking zone's kind of in between here, between the caution light and the Lakeland sign. But here's what I mean. So we're using medium brake pressure to get into the corner, and we don't start turning in until I'm kind of into the corner. I did not initiate that turn with the steering wheel. That all happened from the geometry squishing everything down. So right when you get to the middle of the corner, try to hook this yellow line and then get back to the power. Wait just a second. You don't want to do it too soon because you don't want to ride up towards the wall. But what you want to feel is the rear of the car right now is kind of shifting itself towards the outside of the track. And so what that does in the steering wheel is it makes it feel like the steering wheel is just ever so slightly pulling you to the right. So it's kind of naturally wanting to steer into the slide, and that's what you want to feel. That's going to tell you that you've got a pretty good balance through that corner. Here where this wall's kind of funky is where you want to brake, and at this entry into turn 3, it feels like the car wants to get looser than it does in turn 1, so be aware of that. You might even have to steer to the right as the run goes on. The car will be turning left, but you might have to steer right to make sure that you keep going the proper direction. Once again, with medium brake pressure, and get it down into the corner, hook up with this yellow line and then gas it back out, once again feeling for that particular spot in the steering wheel where it feels like it kind of wants to start tugging to the right just a little bit. It's really important here as you bleed off of your brakes, so as you're releasing the brakes on your corner entry, don't do it too fast. Do it nice and smooth so that you don't upset the weight balance of the car. And similar with getting back to the throttle, you don't just want to treat it like a light switch and hammer back on it. You want to kind of feed it in quickly, but not immediately, if that makes sense. Since one of our biggest worries here is tire heat instead of tire wear, you don't want to do anything that's going to scrub them a little extra and make them get hotter, because that's just going to hurt you over the long run. Alright, so now the real question that we have to get into for this video: to shift or not to shift, by Billy Shaky Circles, William Shakespeare's much more country and way lesser known cousin. So it doesn't appear to me to be much of a question on which is faster. It's really more about which you're more comfortable with and what kind of feedback your car is giving you at the time. So for me, I prefer to stay in 4th gear. I don't like to downshift. And the way that I combat the car getting tight is that, number one, I might slightly shift my brake bias a little bit more to the rear as the run goes on. That helps you get a little bit more rotation on your corner entry, and if you can keep that through the corner, then you'll be doing a pretty good job. The other thing I do is this: I'll go into the corner a little bit higher and I'll cut down just until I get next to that yellow line. And when you do that, it actually loosens the carb a bit if you get 2 tires on that yellow line. And it helps it kick around, similar to how it would if you were to actually shift. So I've got an example of that coming up here in just a second. But that's what I prefer, because I feel like I keep the car a little bit more stable and I just feel better overall with it. It's a pretty fine line though, so it is kind of a challenge to get right. So here, going through the corner, and we just touch this yellow line. And right at that point, that's when the car is loose and I can get back to the throttle pretty hard. And it's just about as loose as it would be if I were to actually shift the car down into 3rd gear. So now let's take a look at shifting. So you see, right when we get to the slowest part of the corner, that's when you want to shift. You don't want to do it on your entry portion of the corner. You want to get the car slowed down. And as you get to the mid-corner, then downshift, and you see the car kind of hook and rotate a little bit more, which can be helpful, but then you have that problem where you might not get the car into fourth gear and cost yourself some time. So it's kind of adding in some factors that make driving a little bit more difficult than maybe it needs to be. But overall, I'd say find whichever one you're more comfortable with and stick with it. Maybe practice the other just in case you have to use it. But I really don't see much of a time difference even later on into the run with doing either one. Comes down to preference and whatever you're happy with doing. I saved this for later on in the video, so steering ratio and brake bias. I like 12:1 steering ratio because it lets me hang the car out on that edge just a little bit more and makes it less snappy, which is really helpful here, especially with as difficult as the car can be to save off of the corner. And I like a brake bias of 63.5 when I'm starting out the race and in qualifying. So that helps you get a little bit more rotation on entry while you let the car do its thing and start turning. But if it does start building tight, especially because I don't like to shift, I will move the brake bias back maybe 0.5% every 15 laps or so, just to keep that rotation on entry. But I don't like to go below 61% on the brake bias. Anything more than that, I feel like the car just gets too loose on entry and it becomes more of a handful and it's harder just to race. Alright, so for a quick and dirty overview, on your corner entry, let the car do the work. So we talked about the suspension kind of crushing down and hooking the car to the left. Let the car do that work. You don't have to do that work for it. So trust the car, and then when you get into the corner, then you can start taking over and doing some of the work on corner entry and exit. Be easy with the car getting down into the corner and be smooth with letting off your brake pressure as to not upset the balance of the car. And remember to shift your brake bias to the rear a bit if you need to, if you're getting a little bit tight. And if you're not shifting, hook that yellow line on exit. It's okay if you start the corner a little bit wide and then drive it down. If you're shifting, just remember that the car might get looser and looser as you go over to the run. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed the guide. Hope you found some more tricks for the track. Good luck this week. Let me know how your races go. And thanks again for watching another track guide video. I'll see you all in the next one.